As a child of the 1970s, going to the movies was a major event in our household. Every few months, my mom would take my little sister and me to a small one-screen theater in downtown Sparta, Illinois, to see Disney movies, whether they'd be re-releases of the classic animated features or the contemporary comedic films. The first PG-rated movie I remember seeing in the theaters was The Pink Panther Strikes Again, as my dad really liked that series of films. And though I enjoyed the comedy antics of Peter Sellers, the more adult themes and situations went completely over my head. I was 9 years old in the summer of 1977. The first time I heard of Star Wars was when my dad announced that he was going to take the family to go see this movie in the theater. I thought he was going to drag us to some war movie, as he was always watching old World War II movies on television. And I remember not looking forward to seeing this war movie. Somehow I had missed all the advertisements and the hype about this science fiction movie that had been released right around when school let out for the summer. We were in the midst of TV reruns, and I spent most of my time either riding my bike all over our hometown or reading comic books. However, I did catch one scene from the film on a TV news program. There were 4 characters sitting in the cockpit of a spaceship, and in the co-pilot seat was a big, furry ape. This furry character caught my attention, for at that time, I was a fan of the Planet of the Apes franchise, mostly from the short-lived TV show, the Mego Dolls, and the Power Records versions of 4 of the 5 films. On that fateful day in August 1977, our family made the 20-mile journey to Belleville, Illinois, to see Star Wars. But first, our parents surprised us by pulling into the Townhouse Motel off Route 159 and booking a room for the night, presumably because we were going to a late showing and it would have been too late to drive back home. Staying in a motel room was also a major event for a 9-year-old in 1977. It meant cable TV, air conditioning, and a swimming pool. Although my dad never let us go into motel pools, as we didn't know how to swim. After checking in, my dad drove us to the BAC Cinema on the west end of town. The theater had one huge curved screen with a grand golden curtain that would open once the coming attractions would start rolling. Over the years, it became the BAC Quad, as 3 smaller screens were added. This was the theater where I would see most major releases, from the other Star Wars films to the Batman films of the late 1980s and early 1990s. Sadly, the theater has long since been demolished. Although next door to the vacant lot where the theater once stood, the Skyview Drive-In Theater, with its 2 screens, still operates every summer. As the house lights dimmed, we were about to be transported to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. With the first blast of a high B-flat from the trumpet section of the orchestra, the Star Wars logo hit me by surprise before slowly drifting to the endless horizon of deep space. I don't remember having much of an impression for the text that was drifting at an odd angle to, again, the endless horizon of deep space. But then the camera tilted down to an alien planet with a solitary moon in orbit. A small spaceship flew over at fast speed, and then a much larger, diamond-shaped spaceship slowly began to fill the movie screen. With the darkness of the theater blending with the blackness of space, it literally felt like this ship was flying over my head. I was instantly hooked. My memories of watching Star Wars for the first time are in bits and pieces. I could not follow the plot at all, but I was amazed and fascinated by the design of the golden humanoid robot and his stubby robot companion, as well as the white armored soldiers, who I thought were also robots. The look and sound of the laser blast were so real to me. Much more real than any similar effects I may have seen on old science fiction serials or the few bits of Star Trek I may have seen prior to this. And then this other robotic figure, dressed all in black, entered the corridor of the spaceship. And I was at once both fascinated at the overall design of the character and also frightened by the strange breathing sounds he was making. I was in complete awe. We were soon transported to the desert planet below, where the two robots parted ways and where we were introduced to dwarf-like aliens in brown robes with glowing eyes that spoke an alien language. I thought that they were funny, but I also got a sense of how alien these characters and this planet was. The musical score by John Williams really evoked the weirdness of this alien landscape. My next memory of the narrative was seeing the holographic message from the young princess. And again, I was amazed at how good the special effects were. I probably thought it was a real hologram. We soon met the wise old hermit, who wore a brown robe like the little scavenger aliens. And as he made his entrance, I thought that he must be the king of those little scavenger aliens. He brought our young hero to his home and gave him a laser sword, which looked and sounded very dangerous. And of course, I remember my first impressions of the alien bar and the jazz combo playing for the patrons. It's here where we met the big hairy ape character I remembered from the clip on television. The next scene I remember was the destruction of the young princess's home planet, which I actually thought was Earth. In a panic, I started frantically looking around everywhere, expecting us to be blown up at any second. My next vivid memory is the lightsaber duel between the old man and the character I refer to in my head as the Black Commander. I was very shocked when the old man ended up losing the duel and his life. It was probably the first time I ever saw the good guy lose a fight. Aside from all the times Batman lost a fight before being placed in a death trap in all those TV episodes. But perhaps my most vivid memory of seeing Star Wars for the first time was the battle above the moon-like space station. I was caught up by the intensity of the orchestral score as the small fighters speeded down that trench. I was literally bouncing in my cushy, reclinable seat during this final battle. And every time a ship would explode, I would bounce even harder. It was like riding a roller coaster. My last memory of that night was leaving the theater when the movie ended. Night had fallen, and as we were making our way through the parking lot, I saw the parking attendants directing the cars, each with a pair of handheld orange lighted cones. I thought that they were the laser swords from the movie, and I frantically asked my mom if I could have one of them. The movie left a lasting impression on me that, unlike other experiences, did not fade after a day or two. I wanted to know more about this faraway galaxy and the alien characters that inhabited all those strange worlds. Anytime I would see anything about Star Wars in a magazine or a newspaper, I would just stare at the photos and try to recapture the rush of adrenaline I felt watching the film. Eventually, it was through the Marvel Comics adaptation of the film that I was able to follow along with the story and learn all the character names. Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Chewbacca the Wookiee, C-3PO and R2-D2, Ben Kenobi, and, of course, Darth Vader, the Dark Lord of the Sith. My mom would take my sister and me to see Star Wars 2 more times at the Sparta Theater, which incidentally also no longer exists, as it burned down sometime in the late 1990s. My mom also bought me the soundtrack album. And although I was disappointed at first because it was just a selection of the musical score with no dialogue, I listened to those records over and over, and I became very familiar with all the musical motifs for each character and scene. I would sometimes play those records while reading the Marvel adaptation, and later when I would play with the Kenner action figures, spaceships, and playsets. In the days where home video had yet to hit the market, I was grateful when my mom eventually bought me the Story of Star Wars album, which condensed the 2-hour movie into 2 sides of a record that was also played over and over. I started to teach myself how to draw all the characters and spaceships, using the record albums and the comics as my source of material. I would often draw space battles in my notebook while not paying attention in my 4th grade class. It was around this time when, for some reason, our parents pulled us out of the Baptist church and started taking us to a Pentecostal church. The concept of the Force as an energy being surrounding all living things very much mirrored the concept of the Holy Spirit from all the sermons we've heard at this church. In October of 1977, our family attended a revival held at our high school. And yes, the lines between church and state were blurred even back then, but at the end of one of the services, I heeded the altar call and accepted Jesus as my personal Savior. The idea of letting Christ into your heart was, to me, very much like Luke hearing Ben Kenobi in his head, guiding him to his destiny. And from my late childhood through my adolescence, I got pretty deep into the Christian faith. I turned 10 in March of 1978, and for my birthday, I got the Kenner Star Wars Early Bird package at Toys R Us. I sent in for the first 4 action figures, Luke, Leia, R2, and Chewbacca. Over the next few months, my collection of figures grew. Then I got a land speeder, then an X-Wing, then a TIE fighter, and then for Christmas of 78, the Death Star space station. I believe it wouldn't be till my 11th birthday when I would get the holy grail of Star Wars toys, the Millennium Falcon. And I do remember watching the Star Wars holiday special on its only television airing in November of 1978. My excitement for seeing the world of Star Wars on television soon gave way to confusion and disappointment, as we only saw glimpses of our heroes and spent most of our time with Chewbacca's family, Harvey Korman from the Carol Burnett Show, and B. Arthur from Maude. The special picked up a bit with the animated cartoon featuring the debut of Boba Fett, but otherwise the viewing of this program was a forgettable moment in my young life. It was around this time when I heard the reports of a Star Wars sequel being filmed for release in 1980, which for a 10-year-old seemed to be a long time. A long time. But in the meantime, there were plenty of other movies and shows that captured my attention, such as Battlestar Galactica, Buck Rogers, Close Encounters, the first Superman movie, and the Muppet movie. In the spring of 1980, my dad, who was a music teacher at our school, had confiscated a paperback book from one of his students and brought it home. It was a novelization of The Empire Strikes Back. I read that book from cover to cover, and my mind could just imagine the images of the battle on the ice planet and the city in the clouds. The novelization included a page of the cast list, and I noted Frank Oz's credit as Yoda. Of course, I recognized his name from the Muppets, but for whatever reason, I didn't think that the Yoda character was going to be a puppet. There was no pre-release hype for this character in order to not spoil to the audience that this funny, impish character who sounded just like Grover from Sesame Street was really a Jedi Master. And I was shocked when at the climax of the story, Darth Vader tells Luke that he is his father. I regret having robbed myself of experiencing this revelation on the big screen, but I still enjoyed watching the film. And as a 12-year-old, I really appreciated all the dramatic twists and turns, the mind-blowing special effects, and the lovely and elegant score by John Williams. The saga was maturing along with its audience. At that showing at the BAC Cinema, I was surprised and thrilled to see a huge mural of the Star Wars characters hanging on the wall of the lobby. It was painted by a local artist, possibly an employee of the theater. Copies of the Marvel Comics adaptation of the film were sold in the theater lobby, and I read it from cover to cover on the drive back home. I remember getting the Empire soundtrack on LP for Christmas 1980, and I waved my arms like a conductor as I listened while sitting on my bed on Christmas morning. In 1981, I joined the official Star Wars fan club and started receiving the newsletter Bantha Tracks, which was mailed to club members 4 times a year. In the pre-internet years, it was the best source of information on the second Star Wars sequel to be released in 1983. An eternity for a 12-year-old. Thankfully, I was able to fill the summers in between with viewings of E.T., Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. There was also the first Star Wars radio drama produced by National Public Radio that I would record on audiocassette and listen to over and over. The fan club held contests where the grand prize would be a coveted item such as a screen-used model of an AT-AT walker. One such contest was the Creativity Contest, where fan club members can submit entries in 6 categories: 2D art, 3D art, music and sound, models, film, and miscellaneous. For my entry in the music and sound category, I recorded a cassette tape of homemade sound effects. I created blaster sounds from a Slinky toy. I ran saliva through my teeth while holding the microphone close to my mouth to create R2 sounds. And I played my trumpet with the valves pushed halfway down to create Wookiee sounds. I submitted the tape to the fan club, and months later I received a telephone call from Ben Burtt, the man who created and designed all the sound effects for Star Wars and Empire. He told me that I tied for first place in the music and sound category. We talked for 10 minutes, and all I really remember about our conversation was that he was impressed by how I made the Chewbacca sounds from my trumpet, and he shared how he recorded various animals from the zoo and compiled them to create the Wookiee sound. He ended our conversation by saying that he was about to catch a plane for England to record sounds for Revenge of the Jedi. I soon received my prize, which was a collection of still photographs from Empire, from 8x10s to poster-sized prints. I still have the 3 poster-sized photos framed and hanging in my home office. In the spring of 1983, the fan club was selling one-sheet movie posters for Revenge of the Jedi that you could purchase via mail order for $10 each. It was a stunning piece of art, mostly in red, of Darth Vader's helmet and Luke and Vader fighting on the steps of the carbon freezing chamber. It was after I received this poster when it was announced that George Lucas had changed the title of the film to Return of the Jedi, and the Revenge poster soon became a collector's item. I still have this poster, which I had professionally framed years later, and it's also currently hanging in my office alongside 4 framed Star Wars posters from a 1977 Burger Chef promotion that I picked up loose at a rummage sale for 50 cents each. On May 25th, 1983, I skipped the last day of my freshman year of high school, and in the afternoon, the 4 of us once again drove to the BAC Theater to catch the 7 p.m. showing of Return of the Jedi, the first showing on opening day. We arrived mid-afternoon, and my dad and I stood in line for tickets while my mom took my sister to her violin lesson. My dad thought it was ridiculous to be standing in line for hours to see a film, but this was one of the first times that I interacted with other hardcore Star Wars fans. For once, I wasn't shy, and I was having conversations with the fans standing in line with us, and I was really enjoying myself. It was my first real experience of interacting with fellow fans, and I would not experience that again until I started going to comic and sci-fi conventions during my college years. The painted mural that hung in the lobby for Empire made its return to parents. Before the movie started, I bought the comic adaptation and a souvenir magazine. I made sure not to peek through the comic and spoil any surprises, but I did leaf through the magazine to look at the pictures. And on the page where they listed the acting credits, I noted a character on the list named Anakin Skywalker, and I wondered if this was the other that Yoda referred to in Empire. Before long, the house lights dimmed, and the entire theater cheered when the Lucasfilm Limited caption appeared and when the first note of the fanfare echoed throughout the auditorium. Everyone applauded and cheered as each of our beloved characters made their appearance on screen. Vader's first appearance got some boos and hisses, but I think a few people applauded his entrance as well. After rescuing Han Solo from the clutches of Jabba the Hutt, Luke returned to Dagobah to learn the truth about his father and for the revelation that he had a sister. At first, I thought that this could be the Anakin character listed in the credits in the souvenir magazine. But when Luke proclaimed that it must be Leia, I thought, no, it can't be. Obi-Wan never said, yes, she's your sister, but just that his insight served him well. Later at the Forest Moon, Luke revealed this truth to Leia, who had somehow always known that they were siblings. And I thought, okay, they're actually making Leia his sister? I was really disappointed, as the first two films set up this Luke, Han, Leia love triangle, and I was rooting for Luke to get the girl. It was probably because I identified more with Luke than Han, and Carrie Fisher was my first celebrity crush. We were treated to 3 climactic battles at the end of the film, and I was most invested in Luke's duel with Vader and his confrontation with the Emperor. The space battle was a bit overstimulating, and although I enjoyed all the effects shots with the scout walkers and speeder bikes, I thought the idea of this tribe of teddy bears defeating fully trained Imperial stormtroopers was a bit far-fetched. When we drove away from the theater, I instantly felt a sense of loss and sorrow, for I knew that this would be the last time I would see these characters for a long time. A long time. There were reports of Lucas making 6 more movies, 3 before the events of Star Wars, and 3 after the events of Jedi. But I knew that would be years, if not decades, away. After the excitement of seeing Jedi faded, I looked back on the film with some disappointment. For unlike Empire, Jedi seemed to have taken a step backwards. The silliness at Jabba's palace and the Forest Moon of Endor overshadowed the seriousness of Luke's final battle with his father. The second Death Star battle was just a rehash of the first, and all the loose ends were tied up just a bit too neatly, especially the Luke, Han, Leia triangle. At age 15, I didn't exactly feel that I outgrew this fantasy world, but I knew that it was time for me to move on. I started watching reruns of Star Trek, but although I enjoyed the movies, it wasn't until I graduated high school in 1986 that I started to appreciate the classic series. But while I was in high school, I slowly got into an odd British sci-fi show that aired late Sunday nights on my local PBS station. Star Wars brought me from my childhood to my adolescence, while Doctor Who not only saw me through to my early adulthood, but it actually was a catalyst that eventually led me away from the Christian faith altogether. But that's another story. While I was still in high school, my family would rent out VHS machines and tapes on weekends. Eventually, we bought our first VCR and owned a copy of the Star Wars trilogy, albeit the pan and scan versions. But I was finally able to watch these movies whenever I wanted. And every time to this day, these movies are always viewed through the eyes of my younger self. These movies inspired my love of drawing, music, drama, and science fiction. They helped me to cope with all the hardships that life in this world brought my way, and to understand how society works for both good and ill. I don't know how I would have turned out if these films were never made, but I feel a great sense of pride in being of the first generation of Star Wars fans. I will always remember the impact that Star Wars had on the world and in my own life back in the summer of 1977. It was a time where millions of voices cried out, not in terror, but in great joy and celebration. And those cries have yet to be silenced.
Anda, umaji muna. Ho, 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 ho.